Welcome to the Microbiology and Molecular Genetics video series for student development. My name is Amanda Demackiewicz and I'm a microbiology biochemistry senior at OSU. I am planning on going to medical school and eventually teaching first and second year medical courses. I have questions for each of you to help give myself and other students interested in the route to academia some insight on the process. So I'm going to begin with a question. Give a short summary about you, Dr. Conway.
Well, I'm a professor of microbiology at Oklahoma State University. I graduated from here. I have both my bachelor's and my doctorate degree from here. I did postdoctoral work at the University of Florida, and I had several academic appointments before returning to OSU last year.
My name is Erica Luter, and I'm an assistant professor here in the department. I'm originally from Canada. I did my bachelor's in biochemistry at the University of Lethbridge, followed it up with a master's and a PhD from the University of Calgary, and then went to the NIH at the Rocky Mountain Laboratories for my postdoctoral studies before coming here.
My name is Jeremy Jackson. I'm originally from Kansas. I did my bachelor's in genetics at the University of Kansas, did my doctoral work at the University of Tennessee, and just began my postdoctoral research with Dr. Conway last summer in the Department of Microbiology and Molecular Genetics.
So why did you want to become a professor, and when did you know it was something that you wanted to do?
I think it's just always the next step. When I was a senior in microbiology, I made the decision to go to graduate school. When I was finishing my graduate work, I made the decision to postdoc, and then just seemed natural to apply for assistant professors. The mentors that I had, that I emulated, were all professors, and so it just seemed like the natural next step.
When I was an undergrad, I used to go to class, and I was always impressed by the professors who were teaching our classes. And eventually I thought that would be a very awesome job. So I ended up applying to graduate school, and after that it was basically following one step to the next. I fell in love with research, but I also fell in love with teaching, and this is the best job for that perfect mix.
Kind of similar to Dr. Conway and Dr. Luter, I always enjoyed working with my professors in undergrad, and so I actually worked in industry prior to going back to graduate school. So my decision was somewhat influenced by kind of experiencing what it's like on the other side from academia. So I know that I want to be in academia, and it just gives me the opportunity to continue working with like-minded individuals, but as well undergraduates and graduate students.
I have heard that getting a professorship is difficult. Can you tell me what I can do to make myself competitive in the world of academia when applying for my first professorship?
Well, to begin with, the career of a scientist is established in the research laboratory. There's no question about that. At the university, success of a professor at each of the different stages that we can talk about begins with scholarship, but also includes teaching and service. In the case of a scientist, scholarship is synonymous with research. And so really our tenure decision is made by the quality of our research. We have to get grants, we have to publish papers, and we have to have students in our laboratory. That is, we have to launch and sustain an active research program.
Okay. If I would give advice to anyone who wants to enter this, I would say get involved in research as early as you can. So being involved as an undergraduate will give you an idea what it's like and give you an idea what you prefer, what kind of research you prefer, and that'll give you a good jumping off point when you're applying to graduate school. After that, it's following each step as it comes.
I don't have a whole lot to say on this one because I'm not an assistant professor, but I would say from the vantage point of a postdoc, you probably, as you exit graduate school, you probably want to identify a mentor who has a good track record of placing postdocs in academia, in addition to obviously being really good in the laboratory, like Dr. Conway said. And for me, those were the two priorities were, again, identifying someone who had excellent research program that I could kind of glean knowledge from, but also someone who had done really well as far as kind of mentoring his postdocs and helping them find jobs at the next level.
It is hard to get these jobs, right? So I don't know how many applicants there were for Dr. Luter's position, but we just filled a position. We had over 100 applicants. All of them had completed their postdocs. We narrowed it down to 9, and interviewed 3 people and hired the best of them. So it's quite the rigorous process. So good postdoctoral training is important in establishing a research career before you apply for an assistant professor position really is important.
Can you explain the difference between assistant, associate, and full professors?
Well, from the perspective of a department head, an assistant professor is seeking to establish an active research program and to establish national recognition as a scientist. That would warrant promotion to associate professor and tenure. An associate professor is looking to be promoted to full professor, and the decision for promotion to full is establishing an international reputation, and that involves in the first place establishing a strong research focus in one area, getting it funded, publishing papers. By the time someone's promoted to full professor, the expectation that they will have repeated that process several times over, 3 or 4 perhaps.
Okay. How much of your time is dedicated to teaching? What do professors do when they are not teaching classes?
That's a very good question. So for me, I'm scheduled to teach 6 credits a year. It might not sound like a lot from a student's perspective, but there's a lot of prep and work that goes involved in preparing classes. So, and don't get me wrong, it's very enjoyable. But at the same time, we have a lot of research to do. So we run our labs, we interact with our graduate students and our undergraduates, we're writing grants. And we also do service to the university. So we serve on committees, and we try to be as involved as we can. So when we're not in the classroom, we're actually still very busy.
Okay.
So our faculty all have research, teaching, and service appointments, and in our department, typically it's 55% research, 35% teaching, and 10% service. That varies from place to place. Usually service is a minor component, but that involves service not just on committees at the department, college, and university level. It also involves peer review of manuscripts for journals, reviewing grants, and Dr. Luter could talk about serving on an NIH study section. She just returned from doing that. It's a tremendous amount of work, a lot of reading. How many grants did you review in that?
Close to 5, but I ended up reading all of them, and there was about 30 of them.
Wow.
So it's a lot of work. Teaching, you would think, teaching 1 or 2 classes a semester is no big deal. You spend most of your time in a research laboratory, but providing the best possible presentation in the classroom is really important to us. We take complete ownership of that. So there's a lot of preparation time, preparing the materials, being ready to stand in front of a group of students who have, I hope, high expectations. There's a lot of prep work that goes into that, and we take teaching very seriously. But it all begins in a research laboratory, and what we're really hoping to do is bring our enthusiasm for research into the classroom.
Okay. What is the biggest misconception about being a professor?
I think the biggest misconception is that we're just not doing very much. The truth is, when I wake up in the morning, I start thinking about science, and I'm usually done about the time I fall asleep. And not just 5 days a week, that's every day. I'm a scientist to the core. It's the way I look at the world. If I'm looking at how the grass grows, I'm thinking about the science behind it, I think that's the biggest misconception, that I just go out and play golf when I'm done teaching my classes. I don't play golf. I don't play computer games. When I'm not teaching classes or serving on a study section or reviewing manuscripts, I'm talking to postdocs and students in the laboratory, or I'm doing research on the computer.
I guess I would say, again, one of the biggest misconceptions that I've realized about professors is that they're boring people, and that they don't have lives outside of the laboratory, which couldn't be further from the truth. As an example, I know Dr. Conway and his wife like to garden. Erica likes to brew, and she also is involved with social groups here in the university at Oklahoma State. I remember my major professor at Tennessee, he and his wife were extremely involved in Argentinian tango. So, you know, professors are people, despite the fact that every time you come into the building, they tend to be there, and they also tend to be there when you leave the building. So, trust me, they go home, and they're regular people as well.
Okay. What would you say the best part about your job is?
Interacting with students, no question. I could have chosen to go into industry. I began my research in the biofuels field. There's a lot of biofuels companies out there, and they're doing wonderful research. As a scientist, that would have been really exciting. But what would always have been missing for me is the interaction with the students. And the very first thing when I came to Oklahoma State was I brought people like Amanda and others into the laboratory. We have 6 undergrads working in the laboratory right now. That's the best part of it.
I have to agree. It's definitely interacting with students. I love teaching. I love getting up in front of the classroom and sharing knowledge and getting students to also appreciate science in the same way I do. But I also really love being in the lab. I love mentoring undergraduates and my graduate students. So essentially, it's all coming down to the students in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I can't disagree. Again, I think it's interacting with the students, especially at my stage or at the stage I'm at. I'm essentially here to learn, and so, you know, what I get out of this experience is directly correlated with what I put into it. So I can spend a lot of my time reading papers, designing experiments, figuring out how to answer questions that interest me, with the overall idea is that I take some of this with me when I'm ready to become an assistant professor like Dr. Luter. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Amanda, I know you're asking the questions, but you didn't ask, what's the second best thing in our job?
What's the second best thing?
Oh, thank you. You know, that discovery process in science is what keeps us going. And that day when I answer the question, that's a really cool moment.
Okay. What is the work-life and family balance like?
It can be a bit of a juggle sometimes. Sometimes your focuses will have to shift depending on what it is that you need to do. But with assigning priorities and working efficiently, it's actually fairly doable to have a home life, a social life, and be successful as an assistant professor or a professor of any rank. So.
If you were to ask my kids, they would tell you they remember me always as they were growing up with a book in my hands. I spent a lot of time at home reading.
Okay.
I would say that I probably never shut my brain off, even though I leave work and go home. And that's probably, you know, Dr. Conway and Dr. Luter would probably agree that even though we leave work sometimes, it's because we physically have to go home and sleep. But there's probably not too many segments of time during the course of a day, like a Sunday even, when I'm not thinking about work or planning mentally what I'm going to do when I do go back into work. So. Still, that being said, I do make time for my wife and, you know, for us to get out and do things. But it's, it can be challenging sometimes.
One of the toughest things about being a dad, my kids are grown, they're out of the house now, was working hard all day long and going home and having that job of being a dad. You don't get to just sit down on the couch. It keeps on going. And Jeremy's expecting father, and so he'll learn this too. You learn how to balance it because it's the right thing to do. But I don't think it diminished in any way the time I spent doing science. I just started earlier in the morning so I could get home by dinner time.
Yeah.
And earlier in the morning sometimes meant 4 a.m., but that's what it took.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you describe your ideal student?
So I'll take the bite on this one. Being new, I guess I would say it depends on the scenario. For the classroom, my ideal student is one who shows up to class, participates in class. That's a very big one. Does their homework, does their readings, and makes the class engaging with the way I try to make it. To me, that's an ideal student, one who's very excited to learn, one who really wants to be there. In terms of, let's say, a research student, it's definitely one who is trying to be involved, inquisitive, very, very much interactive, and not afraid to try things. So essentially just being involved is the biggest thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that curiosity, that's the biggest driver. But undergraduate students especially have to translate that curiosity into work at the bench. And that means they have to be present. They have to be asking all of the right questions. When the postdoc and the grad students are in the lab talking, they should join into that conversation, get the most out of it that they can. Sure, a lot of it will go over their heads to begin, but by osmosis, they'll just learn and start to get it. And it's really important that they participate. It's also really important that they don't miss classes to be in a research lab, so they have to keep up with their studies. But I'd say being present in the lab and not being afraid to try anything. Realizing that the laboratories is theirs to run experiments, and they don't necessarily have to be told what those experiments are. If they have an idea, the laboratory is the place to pursue it. That's really the second coolest part about science.
Okay.
I guess I would say, because I'm in the lab a lot, working with undergrads, is the ideal student for me thus far has been the student who, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say is overbearing, but the student who insists upon coming into the laboratory and doing work and making me answer questions, because that only helps me learn how to teach, but it also gives me the assurance that this student is actually trying to get something out of the experience. Because if you have a student who's constantly wanting to come in and do research, it makes it a lot easier than me having to email them and ask if they're coming in, because then you begin to question motives. But again, I think for me, students who are driven is probably part of the ideal undergrad.
Absolutely.
Okay. What final bit of advice that you wish you would have known when you were a student would you give us?
Don't give up. Sometimes you're going to hit a wall, and when you hit that wall, sometimes it might feel easy to turn around and do something else. If you have a dream and a passion, just follow it. It might not be the easiest road, but it's going to be well worth it once you get there.
I would say prepare for every exam like it's the last one you're going to take.
Okay.
I would say one bit of advice would be to just remember that if graduate studies were that easy, a lot more people would be doing it.
I suppose if you don't feel like quitting at some point along the way, you're probably not doing it right.
Okay.
And if you're a mentor, you darn well better be talking your students out of quitting.
Yes.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful for any students who are considering the route to academia. Join us next time when we make a video about the medical laboratory sciences.